hopefully, fingers crossed, our secret marketer is going to appear on stage in a minute. Now, he can hear everything I say through my mic, fingers crossed, and he can also hear what you guys say through your mic. So what I'm going to do is start off with a few questions for him. Like I said, he's the marketing director of a really big brand. He's listening to me now, so I need to be kind about him. He's got so much experience. He's a very, very clever man, and so he's here to answer your questions honestly. Now, I'm going to start off with a question of my own, first of all, for him. Are we good to go? Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start off. So, secret marketer, one of the questions that some of the Marketing Week Live people tweeted us, I can see you blurry up there, is do you really see your agencies as partners, as lots of agencies tell me, or are they just service providers to you?
Hi, Ruth. I hope you can hear and see me now, although not in perfect Technicolor. A bit like Clark Kent here. Do I see agencies as partners or suppliers? I think that there is only one answer to that, and clearly they have an extension to my team. They always have been, actually. And I think over time, as client marketing teams have reduced in size and probably de-skilled in terms of experience, we are more and more reliant upon those agencies to bring things to the table that we don't have ourselves within our own knowledge bank. I think the challenge, though, for me, and again, I guess I've noticed it probably increasingly in recent years, is whether that skill set exists within the agencies still, and particularly, do they really understand my business? And so the question I'm always asking the agencies is whether they really appreciate what my customers are saying, what's happening with my competition, and so they really do need to be much, much closer to challenges that I face if they really are to add value to my team.
And so let's talk about something that everybody here has been mentioning to me. So social media, has it changed the way that your brand does things, or is it more of a fad?
Well, I think that's quite a controversial statement, and clearly I think that most people would accept that social media has made a massive difference. But I do think there is a question of whether it's made a positive or a negative difference. Certainly from my perspective, it's made things a lot harder as a brand owner. If for no other reason than my finance director thinks that marketing is now free, because all the stuff he does online and through social media is free, therefore he assumes that our marketing is free as well. So clearly it's a challenge to educate him in that social media is far from free, certainly to do it properly. Is it a fad? I think it's constantly changing, and I think that we have to keep rapidly up to date with how those things are changing. And I think it's probably more prevalent as a successful medium in B2C than it is in B2B. I still haven't seen a really good example of where social media has changed the ability to sell within the B2B environment. I think it has a big role to play in terms of brand building, and I think it has an even bigger role to play in terms of brand protection. If you get it wrong in social media channels, you will be slaughtered. I think I've mentioned in one of my columns before, I used to work in the travel sector, and certainly there I think brands like TripAdvisor have really made hoteliers and resorts and holiday companies keep on their toes, or else they really will be attacked big time by the TripAdvisor program. So I think social media is here, it's here to stay, but I think it will change drastically in the years ahead, and we as brand owners have to appreciate that.
So just to be clear, how do you justify to your finance director that it's not all free?
That is the tough question, really, and I think what you have to point to is all the crap that he gets through the channels that he follows, and just point out that actually to make a real difference, you've got to do it properly, you've got to invest in it, you've got to differentiate, and really just got to show how quality pulls through. I think the other point, which is why I sort of said that there's this difference at the moment between B2C and B2B, is you really need to lead by example, and what we really need is more examples of where big brands have used social media to actually drive the bottom line through top line sales. And I think increasingly there aren't increasingly number of examples of where we can point to that, certainly in the sector that I currently operate in, and I really am looking for those examples to point to say, hey, such and such has just grown their top line because of what they've done in social media. So all those agencies out there, please, the more case studies you can provide that really do make a difference, and they are big examples rather than just simple, tiny ones, then that really will help us all.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're going to start taking some questions from the audience, because I'm sure they've got some things they want to ask you. So could I have some hands up? Who's gonna kick off? One over here. So a microphone is going to come your way, and then I'll repeat for our secret marketer just in case it's not clear.
In a business where you're customers don't really want to know about you because as long as everything works, they don't want to hear from you. How would you propose sort of your marketing strategy? Because a lot of people say obviously the focus is on your people, your staff, la la la, but we obviously need to do some element of marketing as well.
So what kind of brand do you mean? Say an insurance brand, or?
I mean, insurance is a good example, but we're a data center provider.
Okay.
So as long as the data center keeps running, don't call me. If it fails, call me. Other than that, don't talk to me. That's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
So what would you propose as good strategies in that kind of industry?
Can you hear that, secret marketer?
Yes, I did, Ruth. Thank you. Quite early in my career, I worked in the utility sector, the energy sector, before it became competitive. So I'm not sure if any in the audience remember back to the early and mid-90s when you had to buy your electricity from your local electricity company, you had to buy gas from British Gas. Well, at that time, we did some market research with our customers, and we discovered that less than 1 in 3 actually knew the name of the company supplying their energy to them. And so what we tried to do at that time was try and build a relationship with the customer. What we also knew is that all of the relationships we did have at that time were all negative. Paying a bill, complaining about something, digging up the road outside your house, a power cut, all of those things. And we knew that we'd never get to the position where somebody would go into their house and turn the light switch on and they'd say, "Thank God for my electricity company." So what we tried to do was build that relationship, build that empathy with the brand and the customer. And it was quite a hard and long journey because we'd spent sort of 100 years of doing everything, trying to keep out of the sights of the customer. I think another story from that time, I remember doing my very first direct marketing campaign when I got there to try and convince people to move to direct debit. And I got 5,000 complaint letters. And I sent those complaint letters off to the customer service centre and I said, "Here you go, guys, you've got these complaint letters," because actually the complaints weren't about my mailing at all. They were about a problem they'd had on their voltage or a power cut or whatever. And the customer service centre sent them back to me and said, "Well, it's your fault for writing them in the first place. They didn't know where we were before, so they couldn't have complained before." And so that's the example where, we really had to try and build that relationship and build that opportunity for customers to engage with you. So I think in the example of the questionnaire, you have to find what that common ground is. What is it that customers are interested in? I think I heard you say data centers, so that sounds to me like a B2B type of environment. And certainly I think, I've worked in B2B and in B2C, and I think B2B, it is a bigger challenge because the customers are very much driven by procurement departments. They're driven by lowest price rather than necessarily what makes a difference. And so what we need to do in B2B is really build the what's important to that customer. So is it about keeping the lights on in the case of a data center? Is it ensuring your data is secure? Certainly, you will all have read in the press last week the problems that NatWest have had with their computer systems, something which everybody I would have thought before that had taken for granted. And now I think that suddenly the bankers of this world will start to be much more cognizant and asking all the questions of their B2B suppliers to ensure that they provide that security of supply so that's never going to be a problem again. But anyway, going back to the question, I know I'm rambling a bit here, but I think it is about understand what it is the customer wants is important to them, and then try and relate to that as best you can as your brand. But I don't disagree that B2B marketing is much more difficult than B2C in terms of trying to engage customers in that emotional sell that we think marketing really stands for.
Brilliant. Okay, who's next? Okay, question over here. Microphone's just coming your way. If you'd introduce yourself first with your company, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm head of marketing for City University. The problem I have at the university, because it's such a massive institution, there are lots of kind of independent, autonomous departments. And so central marketing is pretty much viewed as the balloons and pens department. And I wondered if you had any tips about how we could kind of raise our profile and get people to kind of respect us for what we do.
Yeah, I share that view, and certainly I've worked in a number of brands and businesses where trying to get marketing on the map internally is a challenge, and I still face that problem today. I think the answer is you've got to talk the language of the people making decisions within the university, within your company. So clearly, if the university is all about people enrolling at the university, if it's about people fee-paying people from overseas or etc., you've got to talk in that language. So in my world at the moment, it's a very sales-led company. So when I talk about building brands, when I talk about market insight, it really doesn't cut much mustard with my audience. But if I can talk about sales pipeline, if I can talk about how many widgets that we're going to sell on the back of this campaign, if I can talk about how many more people are going to put us on their shopping list, then that's the sort of language they want to hear. And I think my advice to you in the professional services areas like universities is really understand what's the currency that the decision makers in your business are interested in, and then talk about how marketing can help shape that currency. And yes, of course, we all do colouring in and all that at the best of times, but actually we do a lot more than that. I mean, if it wasn't for marketing, then that university would not be half as successful as it is today, and you need to try and get that across, but talk in the, as I said, in the currency, in the language, in the numbers that get them excited.
So something I was interested to know, this is Ruth again, was what do you think of the new marketers who are joining your business at the moment? Do they approach things differently from how you would? And what are the kind of opportunities and challenges in that sense?
Yeah, Ruth, I think that's a really, really good question. I think that when I started out back in the late 80s, early 90s, I joined a very big brand and I was on a graduate program, and I spent 2 years actually on the front line of the business. 2 years of actually understanding two very important lessons. Firstly, how the customer interacts with the brand itself, so what they do at the counter, in the store, over the websites now, although obviously we didn't have websites in those days. But secondly, you learn how head office interfaces with the front line. And you understand that the people in the front line, when they get their latest missive from head office, you shall do this and you shall not do that. You understand what it feels like to be in their shoes. And I think in today's world, a lot of people are coming straight from university, where they've done a marketing degree, straight into a marketing department and expecting to shine from day one. And I think the challenge that they face and the challenge that we face as they join us as more experienced marketers is they don't really understand exactly what it's like to be a customer, exactly how our brand operates. I was very fortunate to work with Alan Layton once, Alan Layton of Mars and Royal Mail and Selfridges fame. And Alan tells the story how when he worked at Mars, he worked on the Maltesers conveyor belt line. And one day he was sent back to the shop floor, and he was a young executive, but he was sent back to the shop floor, and he joined this conveyor belt of Maltesers. And like Maltesers, I'm sure you all know, they kind of roll, and they were and some of them were falling off the conveyor belt. And he said to the foreman, "Well, what do you want me to do as I'm here for the day?" And they said, "Well, Alan, what you need to do is sweep them up." And so Alan got the brush and he started to sweep them up. And they all sort of laughed at him and said, "No, that's not how you do it." And Alan said, well, that's the obvious way, and actually that's what it says in the manual. And they said, "No, this is what you do." And they walked over and they stamped on the Maltesers till they were powder, and then they swept up the powder. And the lesson really that Alan was sharing there was that actually the people on the front line actually know a lot of things better than those people in head office, and it really is a very valuable lesson to spend as much time as you possibly can as a young marketer to really understand how our customers really interface with us, what it's really like at the front line, so that you yourself can actually come up with better ideas, better strategies, and ensure that our brand stands out better than the competition.
So I wonder if you have any perspective, building on what we just discussed. Last year I interviewed Nick Varney, who's the CEO of Merlin Entertainments, massive leisure company worth about £2.5 billion. And Nick said one of his biggest problems in recruiting marketers was that he used to get marketers who'd been kind of small CEOs of their brand, so they'd known how to do everything around one brand. But now he's getting lots of very specialised people, so people who are great at digital or data or retail, but not everything. And he said for him that was a real recruitment problem. Are you seeing the same thing?
I think to some extent, but I think a lot of it goes back to the brand and the leadership within the brand. So, I think what you're describing there is exactly the way it's going, and I don't see that's a problem as long as you're a good leader and you can cajole your team and can manage your team accordingly. The challenges that I face in that regard, though, is when you start to have somebody falls out of the team either through sickness or they leave suddenly, or something unexpected happens, and you've got no backup because you're reliant on 15 or 20 specialist point people who are very tactical. You have therefore no way to actually cover those gaps for the holidays or the sickness that come about, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing. And particularly, I'm sure other brands in the audience, very much like my own brand, we've gone through lots of cutbacks in recent years, in the last 2 or 3 years or so. So I've really pared back the people who have been sort of like on the bench, or the generalist marketeers, or all those kind of things. And as a result, I have really no cover whatsoever, and that creates challenges. And that's where I think we're seeing the biggest downside of that type of behaviour you just described.
Oh, very honest. So let's go back to the floor. Who would like to ask a question? I'm a bit blind. Oh, lady over here. Thank you.
Hi there. I've recently joined a design agency. Before that, I was at a large multinational FMCG company, so I've seen both sides of the fence, so to speak. I just wanted to hear your point of view on how your design agency can delight and surprise you. So if you could tell us maybe a couple of things that you love about your design agencies and a couple of things that you really hate and wish that they could improve on.
Interesting. I think that the first half of the answer to that question is what I started off by saying, is that what makes my agencies really get time with me is when they've got something to say, because they understand. They understand my customers, they understand the competition, they understand the way my company operates. So in the current organisation, design is not seen as a high value in the boardroom. In the last brand I worked with, design and creativity was absolutely paramount. And the two different agencies I worked with in those two companies needed to understand that and understand what was really important for me to make me look good when I'm presenting that latest piece of creative or that latest advert or that latest campaign idea to my board. So I think the first aspect is the design agency, the creative agency, has to really understand my business, understand what my customers are thinking, understand what my competitors are up to, and as I said, especially understand the way that my company operates. What don't I like? I think that, clearly when you've constantly got people coming to you with new ideas which are only going to cost you money. So when you take on a new agency, either on a roster or as a primary agency, and then they see that as a foot in the door, and then they're constantly coming to you with, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? When you've already explained to them that, look, this is the extent of our budget, this is the existing agencies we work with, and the fact that you are great is not necessarily going to mean that I'm going to want to from day one, want to spend more money with you. So I'd much rather agencies really understood the status of my company, the status of the nature of how I've brought them on, and the way they work. And then the third point, which is related to both of those, I guess, is I want agencies to work with other agencies. So if I look in my career, where I've had the best relationship with agencies is where I've had those agencies in an ecosystem where they've worked together, where design agency has worked with the below-the-line agency, has worked with the SEO agency, has worked with the PR agency, and they've worked together to help me get the best campaign, the best marketing plan, for want of a better word, at the start of the year, by working together to being synergistic in what they're trying to do and trying to build on each other's ideas. Sometimes that's been a challenge because some agencies are quite precious about who they work with, particularly if they see that agency as a competitor in another field or on another brand. But normally in my case, my agencies are quite ring-fenced in terms of what they do, and therefore there should be no reason why they can't work together. But an agency that can show that they work with others is somebody who I would always be very keen to talk to.
Now, Secret Marketer, do you play your agencies off against each other? Because one of the commonest complaints we get at Marketing Week from agencies is that clients are always asking them, they're saying, my agency, which does some of my work, could do it all for X amount of money, you have to step up. Is this something that you're guilty of? Be honest.
Be honest. Not really, actually. I don't think. And I think it goes back to the point I keep referring to, is that I've always seen agencies as partners. And I think as long as they're doing a good job, then I'm brutally honest with them in terms of whether their price is good, their creative is good, their account management is good, etc. And if they are doing a good job, then I see no reason to want to play them off or want to sour that relationship. But I will be honest and say that there have been lots of occasions where I've fallen out of love with agencies. for one of those three reasons. In those situations, then absolutely I will start looking around. But for continuity's sake, I'm not going to fire them and then go and look for somebody else. I'm going to look for someone else first and then slip them in once they're in place. So I think there is some guilt there. But as I said, if the agency is doing a good job, there's absolutely no reason at all why you should need to play them off. That's not the game we're in.
Okay, tough but fair. So let's take another question from the floor. Please stick your hand up high, as I'm very blind over here.
Hello, Secret Marketeer. It's Branwell Johnson speaking.
Hello, Bramwell.
Hello. I just wondered, have you ever worked for a company that's been involved in a PR crisis, and do you have any advice for corporate comms teams that may find themselves in the eye of a storm, for instance, NatWest last week?
Barclays.
Absolutely. Well, I'll recount one story once. I was on a train. I lived in the country at the time. I was on a train into London, and I got a call from my PR department saying, we've got this call from a journalist, and he wants to talk to you. And I said, well, what's it about? And they said, well, we don't really know, but I'm sure it'll be fine. You can speak on your feet. Just give them a call back. And I said, well, I can't. I'm on a busy train. I'll call them as soon as I get into the railway station. And they said, well, okay, do that then. So I got into the London station I was going into, and I called through, and they put me straight through to the live news desk. And actually, it was Radio 5, and the journalist in Radio 5 said, we now have a spokesman from X company. Mr. X, would you please explain to us what you think about the headline on today's Telegraph? And I'm thinking, okay, right, I haven't read the Telegraph. Where can I find a copy of the Telegraph? Here I am on the platform of this London station to actually understand what it is that he's asking the question. So my response was clearly the shafty, well, clearly we take this very serious indeed. To which he responded, serious? You call that serious? What are you going to do about it then? And clearly it was one of those interviews where I was completely on the back foot, trying to second-guess what was the particular problem that had been identified by the Telegraph that day and how I was going to respond to it. So I think there are lots of lessons around that, around crisis marketing, and I think that you really have to act on your feet, but you've got to be honest. I think all of the stuff that we've seen in the last few days, and even going back for the last few years, and you look at the BP problems and all those kind of things, you've got to be brutally honest. And I think some of the problems that you get is when you get bad advice, and this is where I think PR agencies have a big role to play in advising brands on what to say and what not to say, and the consequences of what they say, and more importantly, what they don't say. And certainly, I think in the situations that you describe with Barclays and RBS, I would imagine that their PR agencies should have been all over them saying that this is what you've got to do, this is where you've got to be open and honest, this is where you've got to be on the news, this is where you've got to make your statements. And I think that there are too many instances where brands are either not being advised or worse, being badly advised. We pay our PR agencies quite a lot of money, and part of the role is there to be our advisor. And they have to play that role to ensure that we kind of get through those problems and come out the other side stronger.
And what about, does the marketing director have a role to play in that? Or should it be the CEO? Who's the person who needs to step forward and represent the brand? Because I was talking with Arthur Leithley, who's the communications director at Virgin Trains, and we were talking about the Virgin train crash which happened 5 years ago in February. And he said it was really important that Richard Branson was that person out there on the scene, that everybody saw that it was being taken seriously at the CEO level. Is that something you've come across?
I don't understand the question, Ruth, because there is only one answer. Because the answer is it's got to be the face of the brand. So clearly with Virgin, it had to be Richard. And again, I remember the incident very well. And Richard was out there, and Richard's style. I've worked with Richard. He's got a very sort of matter of fact, very man of the people kind of style, and he comes across very well in doing that. And nobody else could have done that in that situation other than him. I think we saw last week, or this week, I think it was, the CEO of NatWest on the news, less charismatic, but again, he was there. He was trying to get across how serious the point was. I think you love it or hate it, marketing directors generally are not recognised by consumers. It is the CEO or the managing director or the chairman or whoever it happens to be, and you've got to use those people in the situations where it's as serious as the crisis that I think that you and Bramwell are referring to.
And how has... you're the secret marketer. How has becoming the secret marketer changed the way you think about marketing? Is there anything you now see differently? Now you're kind of commenting on things in a secret style.
Well, I wear my underpants on the outside of my trousers now. That's one thing. I think I can be much more honest, and I think the nugget in the question that you've asked there, I think, is that when we look at some of the stuff, particularly the corporate Twitter sites, the corporate blogs, etc., I think people are rarely honest. Yeah, and I think what I can do as a secret marketer when I write my columns is I can actually say it how I feel it really is. I don't have to check with the compliance department. I don't have to ask my PR colleagues whether or not I can get away with this. And I think that's really important for me, and it allows me to share things from my background, to share things how I feel today, with a level of degree of innocence that I'm not going to get fired tomorrow for saying so. And I think that's something to bear in mind when you read some of the tweets and the Facebook posts and the blogs that you see from corporates. Just how honest are they really being, or has that line actually been signed off by 27 people before it's been published?
Yeah, although not being fired is always a good strategy, I find. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So going back out to the floor, does anyone have anything to ask? Over here. Microphone's just coming your way.
Hi there. So my question's about rebranding. I work for a management consultancy in London, and we're about to go through a rebrand over the next 12 months. They've just recently been bought out by an American company. And I just wondered if you yourself have done any rebrands over the time, or have seen anything that you thought worked particularly well and made it successful, or you've seen anything that you think, absolutely avoid that, and just your thoughts on it?
Yes, I have, and yes, it's a fantastic time of your career to get involved in rebranding, but it can be really quite tricky and dangerous. I can remember I went back. I talked about my days with an energy company and the challenges that we faced, that nobody knew the brand. So I remember doing a lot of work with a creative agency, Newell and Sorrell, which I think were bought by Interbrand in the end. And we spent about £1 million, and we spent about 12 months on this proposal, and we're going to rename the name of the company from what was a regional electricity company into something nice and sexy. In fact, the word was actually going to be called Bright. We're going to change this boring energy company into Bright Energy. Well, just called Bright, actually. And I took it to the board, and I was the third agenda item on the board, and I stood up and I presented this fantastic pack of creative and all of these the designs that had come up with and everything that we'd done. And I was really proud of it, and I sort of sat back and was waiting for a round of applause, and and yes, this is the future of the company. And they sort of mutually said, "Oh, thank you very much indeed, Mr. X, and we'll let you know." And I was kind of really quite shocked by that. And I found out about 8 hours later that agenda item number 1 was we've just been bought by somebody else, and we're going to become called the brand that we've just been bought by, and therefore my ideas and my 12 months of work were completely wasted. I think the other story I relate to was I was involved in a big merger a few years ago between two brands in a sector, and we looked at whether we should rebrand one of the two brands, the brand of the first brand, or whether we should run the two in isolation. And we did a lot of research with customers, a lot of research with staff, a lot of research with investors. And the obvious answer was clearly for cost efficiencies to call it the name of the one brand that had been around a very long time that would then be able to dominate in that sector. But the research came back to say something quite different, that actually different pockets of the population actually related to the smaller brand, the one that our hypothesis was to get rid of. And so in the end, what we chose to do was actually to keep both brands for a period of time. And those two brands are still existing today, and I've got separate identities, separate customer bases, and doing reasonably well. And I think the final story, which actually I think is in my column, which I just wrote for this week or possibly next week, I'm kind of trying to be a week ahead of myself, is around, I saw a CEO speak at a conference last week, and what he was saying is that when two businesses merge, generally they destroy value, they don't create value. And that's because the finance department is always looking for synergies. But actually, if you look at the history, where they've done best is where you've allowed those two brands to continue to exist, retain their culture, retain their brand, retain their people, and just reap the benefit of their profits. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So in terms of your rebranding question, I think you've got to look really, really hard at the situation. You've got to understand what customers recognise in your existing brand, so understand the risks and the weaknesses, and then overlay that with the benefits of what will happen with this new brand. Clearly, brands take time, they take money to be created. So are you throwing away a lot of heritage by getting rid of it? Or is there damage in the old brand and therefore you want to be away from it as quickly as you can? Or really does nobody actually know who the old brand are and therefore it makes much more sense to unite the company behind the first brand? And that's the final point I would say, is just around the internal culture. I think that actually when you're doing a rebranding, you can actually do a very good job if you take the staff with it. If the staff feel positive about the rebrand, they come into work as feeling something new and something exciting. I think there's lots of case studies on the books of where that hasn't happened, and I think you need to be really careful. So be careful, but it's a great time to go through that. It's a great period to do that.
All right, well, we're nearly out of time, so the last thing I wanted to ask you is who's doing a really good job at the moment? And if you were invisible for a day, which company's board meeting would you go to have a nosy at?
Well, I'll take the last one first. I think my own board would be kind of interesting to be a fly on the wall and to see what the CEO and the finance director really think of marketing. I think that the less pithy answer really is clearly, I think any board is fascinating. So I've been very fortunate to sit around the board table of a number of organisations. I think they're fascinating institutions, and you get quite disappointed the quality of debate quite often around the board table and the quality of information. And so it really is quite an eye-opener for a young up-and-coming marketer to actually experience that. So that's how to answer the second question. The first question, again, I'll equally sit on the fence a little bit. I think brands go through highs and lows, and I think we've seen it. I believe yesterday you had somebody from Nokia talking here. Nokia, 3 or 4 years ago was a great brand. It was the only brand in the mobile phone market. Now it really is on its knees, and I hope that the new marketing team will be able to turn that around. Similarly, RIM, the owners of BlackBerry, have had the same problems. If I look at financial services, I used to work in the financial services sector, and to see the way some of those brands have been brought down to their knees, and then you've got the new upstarts, Virgin Money, buying all those branches. I think is a really interesting brand. Metro Bank, interesting where they're going to go. So I think there's lots and lots of change happening. I think it's great to be in a brand that's going through positive change. It's really quite disgruntling, disappointing when you work for a brand that really is on its last legs and really struggling. But above all, really, you need that board on your side. So my message, that came up a couple of times in questions earlier, is really try and get the board on your side. Try and understand the language they speak. Try and get them to acknowledge that marketing has a big role to play. And I think if you can do that, you'll be a very successful marketeer. And marketing as an industry will be far more successful in this country than I think sometimes it is seen today.
Brilliant. Well, I think that seems like a very cheerful note to end the session on. Thank you very much, Secret Marketer.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, audience.
And if you want to get in touch with the Secret Marketer for any reason, obviously he is anonymous, but you can always email us at mw.editorial@centaur.co.uk. That email is in all our magazines. So you can always email us and we'll pass on any questions to the Secret Marketer.